Once in a great while, success will seem to crown a man without effort on his part, through a stroke of favorable accidents. But most successful achievements come through organized effort, directed according to well-organized plans. The process of organizing your mind involves 15 factors, as cataloged in the Magic Ladder to Success lecture. When you hear this lecture, or when you read it in printed form, be sure to analyze yourself. Find out how many of these 15 factors you need to add to those you already are using. Organize your mind with the aid of these 15 factors, and your success will not be far away. How tactful are you? In the morning's mail, we find a letter from a young writer who finds grievous fault with us because he came to our office seeking employment and failed to convince our assistant that she should turn him through the gate to the editorial sanctorum. We have always admired persistence, but it is a dangerous thing unless directed with tact and diplomacy. Usually, it is fatal to success if a salesman begins his efforts to sell by provoking an argument with the man to whom he wishes to sell. The letter that greets us from our aggrieved contemporary covers 2 pages of snappy and to some extent clever sentences, but the painful, inescapable fact is that the letter convinces us of the soundness of our assistant's judgment in refusing the impromptu engagement. No writer who dips his pen in vitriol would make a suitable contributor to this magazine. Unconsciously, this young writer has told us more about himself in his letter of protest than he could have told us in person had he been admitted, a fact which we mention for the purpose of showing how dangerous is the habit of giving way to anger. Thought is the first faculty of man. To express it is one of his first desires. To spread it is his dearest privilege. Adaptability, the self-control to enable one to adapt oneself to any combination of circumstances, is a necessary quality for achievement above mediocrity. If you fail to get that which you go after, you will be fortunate if you charge that failure to your own lack of ability to plan or to your lack of powers of persuasion. You will be very unfortunate if, as our contemporary has done in the letter before us, you charge your failure to the man from whom you sought a favor or to whom you intended to make a sale. The editor of this magazine is much more interested in purchasing suitable material for its pages than the writer of such material is in securing employment. But he cannot recall having ever purchased anything through coercion or merely to please someone who had something to sell. Tact, said an old-fashioned Southern man, is what most of us ain't got none of. No man ever became a successful salesman without tact, and no man ever got very far in worldly achievement without good salesmanship. The friend who wrote us the letter expressing his annoyance at having called once without getting the opportunity to see the editor may be a clever writer, and his letter indicates that he is. In fact, a bit too clever. But he is not a clever salesman, and unless he learns to market his product, he will need tons of paper and many garrets to hold his manuscripts, for his manuscripts will not sell themselves. Ditto as to other classes of personal services. We go through many long, lean, and sometimes cruel years in gathering, classifying, and coordinating facts and knowledge. In short, learning something. Then we must go through another period of years of salesmanship, trying to convince the world that we know something. Woe be unto the man who goes at this convincing task without the aid of tact and diplomacy. Many a man has spoiled the chance of a lifetime by telling too much truth at one time, or at the wrong time, or by expressing his own opinion too arrogantly or too freely. If we said that which we know to be the truth about the world in general, and some of our acquaintances in particular, this would no longer be a Golden Rule magazine, and we would be making enemies faster than we could fight them off. While we know there is much that is wrong in the world, we have elected to turn the spotlight on much that we know to be good. And this policy seems to have been a sound one, for we are growing rapidly and serving well. If you take notice of every event that does not please you, Your roadway in life will not be smooth. The more you show your resentment, the more will people delight in giving you something to resent. It's a good plan to develop tactfulness. What is a leader worth? The sales manager of a new organization was employed on a basis that enables him to earn $50,000 a year. One of the salesmen who works under the direction of this sales manager objected because he, the salesman, could earn but half that amount. There always has been and always will be a demand, a top-notch pay, for the man who can direct others, and such a man can practically set his own salary. No one can stop him. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to stop a real leader of men in any reasonable task that he sets upon himself. The great Havelock Ellis said, "The young men of today show a new attitude toward women and marriage, an attitude of simplicity and frankness, a desire for mutual confidence, a readiness to discuss difficulties, and appeal to understand and be understood." Carnegie made himself a multimillionaire by selecting men who had leadership ability and then setting no limits on their pay. Schwab made himself one of the most powerful figures in the steel industry by the aid of this same principle. Perhaps Mr. Schwab could have purchased the services of Eugene Grace, now president of Bethlehem Steel Company, for $50,000 or even $25,000 a year a few years back. But he preferred to give Mr. Grace all the responsibility he would assume and let him set his own income figures. He is a wise leader of men who understands that it is a poor policy to beat men down to the lowest figure possible when purchasing their services. A much better plan is to select men who have undeveloped capacity along a given line, and then place upon their shoulders sufficient responsibility and give them sufficient pay to bring out the best there is in them. $50,000 a year is none too much for the services of an efficient man who can intelligently and satisfactorily direct the efforts of 100 men or so, helping each of them earn from 5 to 10 times as much as he ever earned before or could earn under his own leadership. How can I sell my services? The biggest market in the world is the market of personal services. Practically everyone has personal services for sale. We are in receipt of a letter from a young lawyer who wants to know how he can build up a clientele without violating the ethics of his profession by direct advertising. This is an excerpt from our reply, which may interest you. I started out to be a lawyer some 14 years ago, therefore I know something of the predicament in which you find yourself. Now, if I were in your place, I would become an attractive public speaker, and I would do my work so well that the newspapers would be compelled to give notice of it. I would find out what subjects were closest to the hearts of the people, and I would prepare myself to talk authoritatively on those subjects. An able speaker always commands respect and attention. The newspapers cannot ignore him, even if they choose to do so, and the door of welcome is always open to him. This is one of the most effective ways for a professional man to place himself before the people, and if he avails himself of it with tact and skill, he will soon find people making a beaten path to his door. By all means, learn to stand upon your feet and speak in public. If there is anything back of what you say, you will soon find a demand for your services, no matter what may be your calling, greater than you can supply. Like attracts like. In the March issue of this magazine, we devoted our most prominent page to eulogizing Dr. Robert K. Williams, who we thought deserved all we said about him. Now Dr. Williams retaliates by not only eulogizing us, but he goes much further and actually renders us a service, the value of which in dollars and cents we cannot yet estimate, but it is very great. Had we used that prominent front page for the purpose of pointing out some weak spot in Dr. Williams' makeup, he probably would have ignored us. But 99% of humanity would have come back at us in a spirit of retaliation. Dr. Williams came back at us too, but he retaliated in kind. As a rule, most men will do this. Slap a man in the face, and if he doesn't slap you back right then and there, He will do so in one way or another, the first opportunity. Speak a good word of a man, and sooner or later he will retaliate in kind. If you understand how the human mind works, you can get anyone to do practically anything that you have the right to ask him to do by first rendering that person some favor of an appropriate nature corresponding to the one you seek. We know an advertising man who earns $25,000 a year. He admits that most of his ideas and all of his inspiration come from a man who earns but $2,000 a year. Not to understand and apply this law of the mind is to deprive yourself of one of the greatest forces with which you could ally yourself. You can actually utilize to advantage the energy in the minds of those with whom you come in contact, providing you make the right move and make it first. Many a man goes through life with a sort of unseen but very much felt "kick me hard" sign hanging on his back, for the reason that he is unconsciously and perhaps unintentionally irritating other people and causing them to strike back at him. Fortunate is the man who has a few enemies, providing he has the intelligence to use their eyes and see himself as they see him. The eyesight of an enemy may be, and usually is, somewhat warped. But if you listen to what an enemy has to say about you, there is no doubt that you will learn something that will help you improve yourself. The law of retaliation is very real. The magazine you hold in your hands is a splendid example of what can be accomplished through the use of the law of retaliation when it is directed to constructive, helpful ends. Through these pages, we have said many nice things about many deserving people, and we have sent out nothing but positive, uplifting thoughts to inspire men and women to accomplish greater results from their efforts. All these people who have read what we have written have retaliated, generally by interesting others in subscribing for the magazine, until the bulk of our daily receipt of subscriptions comes unsolicited, without cost. It pays to say something good about folks, not alone in satisfaction, which is always in abundance, but in dollars as well. We thank you, Dr. Williams, for the service you have rendered us, and those who read what we have to say about you. The servant is worthy of his hire. Since the organization of our lecture bureau, we have learned once more that the servant is worthy of his hire. The majority of our lecture staff is being drawn from two sources: the clergy and the schools and colleges. It's a well-known fact that neither the churches nor the schools pay their pastors and teachers enough to enable them to purchase all of the necessities of life, much less the luxuries. We have clergymen on our lecture staff who have served the church for more than a quarter of a century. Many of them have sons and daughters to be educated, yet their pay has not been adequate to enable them to give their children the advantages of the best schools. It is not surprising that a clergyman would want to direct his efforts into channels that would pay him enough to live on. The self-preservation instinct is a deeply seated one, and the man who serves the church is no different from the man who serves in other capacities, and that he wants to provide adequately for his family, and at the same time lay by a competence for the time when he will no longer be able to serve at all. Friendship is one of God's purest blessings to us. To divide one's heart into 10 or 12 portions is very easy, very sweet, and very amiable. George Sand. Our lecture bureau has attracted some of the best men in the college field and some of the most able clergymen, which is at one and the same time a compliment to our undertaking and a reprimand to those who ought to pay teachers and clergymen enough money to take care of their temporal needs. If your pastor should announce from his pulpit next Sunday morning that he has decided to leave the service of your church and ally himself with your lecture bureau, you should reprimand yourself and your fellow churchmen, and not your pastor, for he is perhaps moved by the desire to serve on a wider scale, and at the same time provide more liberally for his family. If you want to hold on to your clergymen and your teachers, the first step is to pay them what they are worth, or at least somewhere near as much as they could earn in other fields of endeavor. If you fail to do this, you are sure to lose their services sooner or later. This same principle perhaps applies quite as appropriately in the field of business and industry. If a business firm has an exceptionally efficient servant, whether he is in an executive capacity or working as a day laborer, it should be someone's business to see that this servant is paid in proportion to his ability to produce results. Men of the idealistic type, such as most clergymen are, will serve with never a thought of compensation for a time, but economic pressure and growing families and increasing cost of living all combine to force them finally to resort to more profitable fields. The servant is worthy of his hire. Give it to him before your competitor does. Part 3. Leadership. This is the shortest editorial we ever wrote, but it carries one of the biggest ideas we ever had, which is, before you can get that which you call success, you must give something of equal value in return. Set it down as the sure thing, that which you hand the world, whether it is efficient service or poor service, grouchiness or good cheer. If you get this viewpoint and make proper use of it, you will enjoy success this coming year, such as you never experienced before. In one of the great cities, a large factory building caught fire. Hundreds of girls working on the upper floors were in danger of death. The whole lower floor was in flames, and the blazes were rolling up the fire escapes, cutting off all avenue of escape. The crowd stood on the outside waiting for the firemen to arrive. In that crowd was a young man who was different from all the others. He took in the situation, hurriedly measured the distance with his eyes from the burning building to another building just across the alley. Then, just as if he were in full charge, he began to give orders to the bystanders, and in a few minutes he had rustled a crew of 6 strong men. He led the way, and they followed him to the top of the adjoining building. On his way up, he had picked up a rope, and his 6 followers had torn down a billboard and carried the planks to the top of the other building. This self-appointed leader threw one end of the rope to a woman in the window of the burning building and instructed her to fasten it. He scaled the rope, carrying one end of a plank with him. His 6 helpers pushed out the boards they had carried up, and soon they had completed a very substantial bridge from one building to the other. When the firemen arrived, nearly 1/3 of the occupants of the burning building were out of danger. No one invited this young man to become a leader. Leadership is something which seldom comes by invitation. It is something which you must invite yourself into. In every business there is a fine opportunity for a first-class leader. But he must be a man who is willing to do the thing that ought to be done without someone telling him to do it. One of the men who stood in that little crowd of people and watched the flames as they threatened the women in the building, in speaking of the incident afterward, said, "Ah, that was nothing. Anybody could have done that if he'd have tried." And he was right. Anybody could have had that glorious job as leader, merely by stepping up and taking it. But the fact remains that only one man out of the whole crowd saw the opportunity and was willing to take the risk that went with it. Leadership means responsibilities, it is true. But the most profitable work usually is that which shoulders the greatest responsibility on a man. Wherever there is work to be done, you can find a chance to become a leader. It may be humble leadership at first, but leadership becomes a habit, and soon the most humble leader becomes a powerful man of action, and he is then sought for greater leadership. Look down the ages, and history will tell you that leadership was the quality which thrust greatness upon the men of the past. Washington, Lincoln, Patrick Henry, Foch, Roosevelt, Dewey, Haig, and Woodrow Wilson, leaders all. We must be before we can do, and we can do only to the extent that we are, and what we are depends upon what we think. None of these were invited to become leaders. They stepped into leadership by their own aggressiveness. None of them started at the top. Most of them began in the most lowly capacity, but they formed the habit of doing that which needed to be done, whether it was their job to do it or not, whether they were paid for it or not. If you are one of the great majority who have made up their minds not to do anything which is not their job and for which they are not paid, there is no hope of leadership crowning your efforts. Frank A. Vanderlip was a stenographer not so many years ago. We don't know for sure, but we suspect that he did not confine his efforts to the work which his stenographic position required, for if he had, he would never have been the leader of finance which he is today. James J. Hill was a telegraph operator, but had he insisted on working union hours only, and had he delivered no more service than was required to hold the job of telegrapher, he would never have been the great railroad builder that he was. Leadership. What a wonderful privilege it is to be a leader. What a wonderful opportunity there is in every shop, factory, crossroads, grocery store, and business establishment to become a leader by merely doing the thing that ought to be done, whether you are told to do it or not. Part 4. The Power of Extended Vision. Once this writer went to the mountains to gather chestnuts. We took a gallon bucket with us to bring back the chestnuts in. Before starting, we had visualized a gallon bucket of chestnuts. We had prepared to bring back just 1 gallon and no more. When we got to the mountains, we found bushels of chestnuts on the ground, but we had to come away and leave them there, because we had not thought in larger numbers when we planned the trip. We have thought of that chestnut hunting trip many a time in the years which followed. We could have brought back a bushel sack full of chestnuts just as easily as we brought the gallon bucket full if we had extended our vision before we started on the trip. Every time we see a person beginning a new enterprise, we think of that chestnut hunting trip because we know that most people are making the same mistake that we made in not thinking in large enough terms. In planning our chief aim in the years gone by, we can plainly see now that we never achieve more than we aimed to achieve. We doubt if it would have been possible to accomplish more than we started out to accomplish. Happy, contented workmen usually are a mere reflection of the disposition of the head of the works. Now and then, an unusually ambitious person will take along more vessels when he starts chestnutting than will be needed, but generally the reverse is true. It is the same in planning a professional career, or building a business, or developing an education. You may accomplish less than that which you visualized in your plans, but you will never accomplish more. You will never sell more goods than you planned to sell. You will never become more famous in any profession than you plan to become. You will never stand higher in the estimation of your fellow men than you aim to stand. Therefore, it seems worthwhile to extend one's vision every now and then, so it will cover more territory. It is not probable, in beginning any business or profession, that you will see all the possibilities ahead of you when you first lay out your set of plans, but as time goes on, you will be able to extend your vision and make your aims cover more territory. This power of extended vision is something which you must cultivate. The power of extended vision is the only power on earth which will help a person to climb out of the rut of mediocrity in any walk of life. May the gods of fate help the person who lacks this power of extended vision, because he has not cultivated it or encouraged its growth and development. The man or woman who does not periodically extend his or her vision so that it covers more territory, takes in larger numbers, causes him or her to think in bigger terms, may be likened to a horse that has been broken and harnessed to do service as a heavy draft horse. One reason why such a horse never tries to break away from his unfortunate lot is his lack of extended vision. He accepts his fate with complacency, never once imagining that no man on earth could master him if he could think and plan how to throw off the harness. There are a number of people in this world, many millions, all told, we suspect, who are harnessed and hitched to mediocre, depressing, soul-crushing work which merely provides an existence for no other reason than the lack of extended vision. If this is true, or even approximately so, what an ugly indictment it is against our system of educated men and women. If the simple process of extending one's vision so as to cause one to aim at greater accomplishments is really of value, what a distressing pity it is that this fact is not brought out more clearly in every educational institution in the world. This writer may be laying too much stress upon this subject. He may be giving it too important a place among the list of qualities which one must possess in order to enjoy success in this world. But he has a mighty sound reason for his views on the subject. For 22 years, ever since we were thrown upon our own responsibility in the world, we have been watching with unusual interest those experiences which have done most to help us acquire the necessities of life. And we are forced to the conclusion that the ability to extend one's vision and expect more of oneself is not only a desirable quality, but a necessary one. You may never have heard of the incident which was directly responsible for our being able to get out of the dirty, unprofitable work of laborer in a coal mine. But if you have, you will be patient if we repeat it for the benefit of those who have not heard it. That incident took place some 22 years ago. No incident in our whole life has been of more lasting benefit to us than this one, because it gave us the starting point of this idea concerning the power of extended vision. We were sitting before the fire one night, after the hard day's work was over, talking of our splendid new job, which paid us $1 a day. We were proud of that job. $1 a day for a boy of our age was a lot of money. More, in fact, than we had ever seen before, that we could call our own. In our boyish enthusiasm and exuberance, we said something which impressed the old gentleman with whom we were talking. He reached over and took us firmly by the shoulder, gripped it so hard that we almost yelled with pain, looked us squarely in the eyes and said, "Why, you are a bright boy. If you'd go to school and get yourself an education, you'd make your mark in the world." That was the first time in our life that anyone had ever told us that we were bright, or that we could make our mark in the world. Up to that time, we had never thought in larger terms than $2.50 a day. We were receiving $1 a day for our labor, but aspired to receive the same amount as some of the older men were, our limit of extended vision at that time being $2.50 a day in wages, with never a thought of being anything except a coal mine laborer. That remark by that good old gentleman gave us a jolt. We paid no attention to it at first, but we began to think it over that night after we had retired. We retraced our experiences in our mind. We remember the bright luster in the old man's eyes as he made this remark. There was something about his whole action and demeanor which aroused us to understand that he was not speaking of impossibilities. To control thought is the secret of all progress on this earth, and that power is yours if you will exercise it. That remark caused us to extend our vision so that we could see beyond the coal mine in which we worked. It caused us to begin to look beyond the village limits in which we coal miners were located, into another village where there was a school. But most important of all, it sowed seed in our mind, which took root and began to grow. Seed, which we have harvested and transplanted into other minds in many thousands of cases since that memorable night 22 years ago. This editorial and the magazine you hold in your hands may be traced directly back to that 2-minute conversation during which I got my first impression of the power of extended vision. If your lot in life is unsatisfactory, as it no doubt is, you will be well paid for the time you have devoted to listening to this editorial. If you will write about face and draw another and much larger circle which will represent your extended vision, let that circle take in more territory than any you have yet drawn. Let it cover the position or station in life which you seek. Remember that your possibilities of achievement are strictly confined to the limits of that boundary line, which may be called your line of vision. When a modern industrial plant outgrows its housing quarters, the management, if it is sound and progressive, immediately looks for more space and enlarges the plant. You must do the same with reference to your personal efforts, if you are to overcome that undesirable station in life in which you find yourself. To feel dissatisfied with your lot in life is a normal, healthy indication. But to remain where you are, with no attempt to enlarge your vision or plan ways and means of transplanting yourself into a larger field, is abnormal and indicates an unhealthy condition of mind. One of the chief aims of this magazine is to cause its readers to think in bigger, broader, and more progressive terms. There is nothing which we can do that will be of benefit to you except that which we can help you do for yourself. Get away into some quiet spot. Sit down for a few minutes and take inventory of yourself. Find out whether or not you are acquiring more knowledge, developing more self-confidence, widening your circle of vision, setting heavier tasks for yourself, expecting more of yourself than you were a year ago. If you are not, there is room for alarm. One of the reasons why failure is a blessing is that it often causes us to stop, look, and reason. It often causes us to find out some weakness or shortcoming which we had never suspected ourselves of possessing. This writer is particularly thankful for the mistakes he has made in the past 22 years, and for his failures in many undertakings which, had they been successful, would have directed his efforts toward work which would have been less profitable to posterity than the work he is now doing. Many of our mistakes worked a temporary hardship on others, and all of them worked an immediate hardship on us. But these mistakes and failures were profitable because every one of them caused us to climb up out of the debris of the failure itself with a broader and more extended vision than we had before. Fires are usually destructive, but it is a well-known fact that it takes a first-class fire to give many a town its first real growth. The fire comes along and burns out the old, time-worn buildings. This works a hardship on many. Some have no insurance, and others less insurance than they should have had. But as a whole, the fire is a blessing because the owners replace the old buildings with newer and more artistic ones, which add to the appearance of the town and the value of the property. Many a man needs the reactionary effect of some sort of a fire of failure that will sweep away the old, time-worn, inadequate plans which have been holding him down, and give him a chance to extend his vision and build a newer, more progressive and artistic plan that will be wider in scope. One afternoon, this writer was sitting in his office in Dallas, Texas, some time ago. He looked down the hall and saw a very pleasant-looking young man coming toward him, with a salesman's portfolio in his hands. He was stopped at the information desk, but the writer told the boy at the desk to send him on in. When he was seated inside of my office, I said to him, "I don't know what you are selling, and whatever it is, I probably will not be a purchaser. But there is one thing about you that is valuable. You have a pleasing personality." The young man thanked me, then informed me that he was selling electric foot warmers for the Dallas Electric Light Company. I told him that I needed no foot warmers, as I was seldom troubled with cold feet, but I suggested that he ought to be selling something that would give him a larger profit on each sale. I suggested to him that with a personality such as he had, with the self-confidence that he possessed, he ought to be able to sell anything that he tried. This young man was not in my office more than 5 minutes, but during those 5 minutes something happened that will make a mighty big difference to him all of his life. He thanked me for my compliment and went away. About 3 weeks later, the manager of the electrical service department of the Dallas Electric Light Company came to see me. He informed me that I had been the cause of his losing one of his best men, and when I asked how that happened, he said that the young man whom I have mentioned, whose name was Brown, came right back to the office that very day, turned in his sales kit, went out and got a job which paid him much more money, and he was making good in that new job in a big way. I said to my visitor that I regretted that I was the cause of his losing a good man, but I was proud that Mr. Brown had learned the value of extended vision. Mr. Stuart Austin Weir of Dallas was sitting in my office at the time and heard the conversation. After my visitor had gone, Mr. Weir turned to me and asked, "What sort of a shot did you inject into Brown's arm?" And I replied, "The same sort of a shot that I wish I might have the opportunity of shooting into the arm of every person in the world whose lot in life is unfortunate, and who is chained to work, which is both unpleasant and unprofitable.